the chat box, which is at the GoToMeeting sidebar. And then you'll be able to send a question to myself or Joe, and then we can answer it in the last 10 minutes of the presentation. So this is hopefully going to be the first of many bite-sized breakfast briefings covering the latest issues in the sustainability arena. So today we're looking at the recent changes to the DEFRA guidelines on greenhouse gas emissions. And this session will last no more than half an hour. So that will be 20 minutes for the presentation and 10 minutes at the end for the briefing. Today's briefing will condense a massive 111-page report produced by DEFRA, and we'll be summarising the key points. I've also included a link to the report in today's presentation, so you'll be able to access these links when I send out a PDF of the slides after today's briefing. We'll also be recording this presentation, so I'll be able to upload that to our YouTube channel, which is just called SustainIt, and I can send you that in a link as well, so you can view it and see any more details that you might have missed or go through anything that you were particularly interested in. So firstly, let me tell you who SustainIt are. So SustainIt are a sustainability data consultancy. We have almost 10 years experience working with our clients to maximise the potential of their sustainability data. We work with companies who need support managing their sustainability data. So essentially, we work to maximise your sustainability programs by helping performance manage your sustainability data. So we've worked with clients such as Imperial Tobacco, British American Tobacco, Toyota Material Handling Europe, and lots of other names. You'll see them sort of at the end of the presentation who we worked with. So we basically want to create sustainable aspirations with you that inspire and build success, and we also know how to help and select and implement the right sustainability software system for you. Okay. So greenhouse gases can be measured by recording emissions at source by estimating the amount emitted using active data and applying the relevant conversion factors. These conversion factors allow organisations to calculate greenhouse gas emissions from a range of activities. A key aspect of calculating greenhouse gas emissions is ensuring that the appropriate conversion factors are in place and are being applied to energy expenditures correctly. So if you're a company that is based in the UK, you may use the UK government's Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, or DEFRA, guidelines as a source of conversion factors. If you do, then you'll be affected by the 2013 changes to the guidelines. DEFRA have changed the guidelines on calculating CO2 emissions, and therefore the potential exists for UK companies to experience significant shifts in both individual emission factors and also overall Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. These changes have been published as part of DEFRA's greenhouse gas conversion factors for company reporting guidelines. So that's the title that I put in the presentation, and that's the report that's on DEFRA's website, which you can access through the link here. So when I send out the slides on the PDF, you'll be able to access that link. So this 111-page report can be found on the DEFRA website. We will be condensing the report today in order to deliver the key points, ensuring that you fully understand the implication of the changes as a result of these new guidelines. One of the major changes in the latest greenhouse gas emission factor set is separating the greenhouse gas emissions associated with electricity consumption into two clear sections. So these two clear sections are emissions created through electricity generation, and the second one is emissions created through transmission and distribution of electricity. So that's important. So you've got one separation between electricity generation and another separation between electricity transmission and distribution, and this is different to the previous guidelines. So to summarise this, there is an energy cost in moving electricity around the network. And according to the new DEFRA boundaries, any energy spent delivering your electricity to your door can be considered as a third-party emission. So this is the emissions created through transmission and distribution of our electricity. And so these emissions would fall under Scope 3 as a result of the new guidelines. By creating this division between generation and transmission, DEFRA have been able to create a more accurate set of emission factors for use in the calculation of greenhouse gas emissions from electricity consumption. So typically, over the last 20 years, around 5 to 10% of electricity emissions in the UK have come from the transmission and distribution of electricity around the network. However, due to the new DEFRA guidelines, these emissions fall under Scope 3 of a company's CO2 impact. It is also important to consider that DEFRA have looked at how best to integrate the emissions from imported electricity into an overall greenhouse gas factor. So annually around 3% of electricity consumed in the UK is imported from overseas. So DEFRA's new guidelines calculate this electricity using an emission factor based on French's profile. So basically, in summary, the new guidelines mean that there's going to be a separation between electricity generated and the emissions created through transmission and distribution of electricity. So what does this mean? Essentially, the changes to DEFRA's methodology have an accumulative result. The Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions per kilowatt hour of electricity drop by around 5 to 10% when calculated using the updated methodology. So this 5 to 10% now falls under Scope 3 emissions. Furthermore, the new guidelines from DEFRA mean that there will no longer be historic changes to emission factors after reports have been generated. So in the previous guidelines, because greenhouse gas emissions for electricity were generated on a 5-year average, it was entirely possible that the greenhouse gas emissions for 1 year's electricity consumption could change as the data set used to calculate the emission factor shifted. However, as a result of the new changes, data is now calculated based on the actual emissions for that year, meaning that the data will be more accurate and reliable. These changes mean that changes need to be made to existing greenhouse gas calculations that you already have in your records or in your current environmental management system. We will discuss these changes later on in the presentation. Now moving on to fossil fuels. In a similar manner to the changes to electricity emission calculation, DEFRA have changed the boundary of responsibility for fossil fuel emissions. So they've eliminated the all scopes emission factors. So by doing this, DEFRA aim to make it much easier for companies to understand the boundaries of Scope 1, 2 and 3. It means that a single fuel expenditure could have its greenhouse gas emissions broken over more than one scope, as there's different emissions associated with the generation and also the transmission and distribution. So one fuel expenditure could have more than one emission factor. Each fossil fuel now has a clear and distinct well-to-tank emission factor. So this well-to-tank emission factor is the emission factor used for transmission and distribution. And this factor is used to calculate the emissions produced when transporting the fossil fuel. So for fossil fuels, what does this mean, the changes? The major objective of these changes is to allow companies to understand the difference between direct activity emissions and upstream emissions, hopefully making it easier for companies to report on Scope 3 emissions, therefore allowing them to provide their customers and investors with a better understanding of their overall emissions. The move towards well-to-tank emission factors is part of a commitment to better align DEFRA's Scope 3 emission methodology with the guidance provided under the GHG protocol. So that's the WRI Corporate Value Chain Accounting and Reporting Standard. It's hoped that these resulting changes will result in more detailed reporting by companies and increased greenhouse gas emission accuracy by making it easier to break emissions into Scope 1 and 3. So what do these changes look like for your company? Here's an example of how the changes will affect your organisation when reporting on greenhouse gas emissions. As you can see, before the changes to the DEFRA guidelines, natural gas and flights were just defined as all scopes. But as a result of the changes, you can see that there are separate scopes, and one fuel expenditure such as natural gas are split across multiple scopes. So there's Scope 1 for natural gas used, so that's generated, and Scope 3 for the energy used transporting natural gas to the organisation. As you can see, it does not affect the overall greenhouse gas emissions reported, but it does mean that there's a change in what is reported as Scope 1, 2 and 3. So you can see in the example it's moving from all scopes and then they've been split into Scope 1 and then been defined as Scope 3 as well. So there's a greater level of accuracy in the data that you have. As we have mentioned, the change in the methodology has been released by DEFRA to provide companies with a greater capability to produce more accurate corporate reports that consider not only Scope 1 and 2, but also Scope 3 emissions, which have often been hard to report on before. While these changes will undoubtedly require a redrawing of existing CO2 baselines, the increased greenhouse gas accuracy and reporting capabilities are worth the required effort and will provide companies with a more accurate overall emissions total and the possibility of a lower Scope 1 and 2 emission total. So what do DEFRA recommend as part of their new guidelines and in the report? The change in methodology means that it's important to update the emission factors used during greenhouse gas calculations to ensure that historic data is using the correct emission factors. DEFRA recommends removing the historic factors from all previous years' reporting. They then recommend taking the raw data and multiplying that by the appropriate electricity generation factors and report these under Scope 2, and then multiply the same total kilowatt-hour consumption figure by the correct year's transmission and distribution conversion factor and report this under Scope 3. So just to go over that again, it means they want to remove the historic factors from all previous years' reporting, take the raw data and multiply by the appropriate electricity generation factors and report these under Scope 2. And then they want you to multiply the same total kilowatt-hour consumption figure by the correct year's transmission and distribution conversion factor and report this under Scope 3. The same is for the fossil fuels all scopes factors. DEFRA recommends removing the historic all scopes conversion factors and therefore updating your data with a more accurate set of conversion factors. So adopting the appropriate updated Scope 1, 2 and 3 emission factors and recalculating baselines in accordance with the new reporting approach. So to go over that again, it's the same with electricity as fossil fuels. They recommend removing the historic all scopes conversion factors and adopting the appropriate updated Scope 1, 2 and 3 emission factors. And this will therefore recalculate baselines in accordance with the new reporting approach. For companies who have an existing and effectively deployed sustainability software, the switching to a more segmented reporting requires the implementation of dual greenhouse gas indicators for each energy source. The first indicator calculating Scope 1 and 2 emissions, and the second indicator calculating Scope 3 emissions. So for companies who are reporting and they have a sustainability in place, they'll need to switch to a more segmented approach, and the first indicator will be calculating the Scope 1 and 2, and the second will be calculating Scope 3 emissions. So I hope that makes everything clear for everyone. As a summary of that massive £111-page report. And you'll be able to use that as a reference guide, but these slides should summarise the main points of the report nicely. So where can we help, and where does SustainIt have established expertise? So SustainIt can help with this process. SustainIt have almost a decade's experience working with clients and across various sustainability software platforms. We have an exceptional track record of helping to understand, design and deploy appropriate sustainability reporting structures that allow our customers to effectively and accurately report on their overall sustainability impact. So we can help you in this process with the new updated DEFRA guidelines by helping you to use the latest DEFRA guidelines on greenhouse gas emissions and ensuring that your historic data complies with these guidelines. If you would like help in this area, then please do not hesitate to contact myself or Joe, and we can speak more about this. But now we'll open to a discussion, and if we've got any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat function, and then you can send it to the presenters. And we'll pass over to Joe. So Joe's worked for SustainIt for over 5 years now, and he's one of our sustainability consultants with a lot of expertise. So I can start with our first question to Joe. Why should you change from the old guidelines to the new guidelines?
Okay. Hello everybody. This is actually something that came up quite recently as well with a conversation, and there's an obvious argument to be made for changing to the new guidelines in that it allows you to quite easily lower the Scope 1 and 2 emissions. But really, when it comes to sustainability reporting, because it's such a fast-moving set of expectations in terms of government legislation and reporting frameworks, I think the big gain for moving to the new DEFRA guidelines is really it demonstrates a commitment to accuracy. DEFRA, I think, with these new boundaries and with new guidelines, have made a big step in saying, look, we understand that there is more to this, there's more nuance here than just Scope 1, Scope 2, and that's it. They've really made a commitment with the kind of splitting well to tank with a lot more clarity, and the transmission distribution factors for electricity. I think it makes a big move towards a more accurate type of reporting. And for me, when I've had a couple of conversations over the last couple of, I suppose 3 or 4 months now, with some of our clients, the real win for them that they see and that I completely agree with is that it shows right from the start that we've got the ability to do this. It makes more sense for us to be as accurate as possible, so let's do that now. And if nothing else, I think for at least 1 or 2 of them where they've been reporting on greenhouse gas emissions for 5 or 6 years, it's a great way for them to actually take the time to make sure everything's accurate. The rules have changed a lot over those years. This gives them an opportunity to redraw all their baselines in a uniform, coherent way, make sure it's more accurate all the way back. So from that perspective, I think that's the big win. Like I said, the 10% reduction is lovely as well, but I think it really demonstrates that commitment.
Yep, thank you very much. And we've got another question. So what are the other options out there in terms of in comparison to the DEFRA guidelines?
So I love this question because the short answer is there are lots. I remember talking to a friend of mine about this, and they were at a round table with, I think it was about 6 or 7 sustainability managers, all sat there, all talking about how they would like to draw boundaries on Scope 1, Scope 2, how would they want to report on their carbon. And every single one of them was already doing it. pretty much every single one of them was already doing it in a different way, and as far as they could work out, none of them were doing it wrong, which is great fun. So there are a lot of other options out there. Obviously, the big one that gets used is WRI's GHG protocol setup, and I think that's probably over the years been the one that the most international corporations have used in some way, shape or form. Obviously now there's more coming in with people like SASB setting out their own kind of frameworks. I think any kind of setup you have has to be informed by the external standards you want to meet. So GHG protocol, obviously it's the big one, but then you've got things like CDP, GRI, DGSI, all those have their own information that you need to bring in. But they are all frameworks. None of them are a hard and fast set of rules. And that's why there's been so much change. I think one of the things that really came out when we started talking about doing this as a breakfast briefing was DEFRA's moves now to make their boundaries more accurate actually mean that they are probably closer aligned to the WRI recommendations than GHG protocol. Now, obviously the irony there is that GHG protocol was created by the World Resources Institute themselves, but they've not really kept the pace with their own changing requirements. I think plenty of other, so I suppose the summary would be there are plenty of other options out there, and you can pretty much pick one that's best for your company. But from my perspective, I think DEFRA's really good.
Definitely about choosing what's best for your company and where you're based as well, and sort of that's totally agree with that. So a big thing that I know that I'd be thinking about if I was a sustainability professional working for a big organisation is, will you lose anything if you change to the new DEFRA guidelines? What happens as a result of using these guidelines and sticking up to date with the DEFRA guidelines and moving away from the old ones? Will you lose anything if you change to this new approach?
It's a good question. Obviously, it's a really important one. I think if we go back to that point I just made, which is that the new DEFRA guidelines actually place them and bring them even closer into alignment with the WRI kind of ideal. I know that one of my clients actually asked me yesterday about switching and if they would lose the ability to say in their CR reporting that they report in accordance with GHG protocol guidelines. And the short answer, and I'm never a fan of short answers, but it is true, is no. As far as we can tell, you aren't going to lose any kind of major, I suppose, feather in your cap in terms of CR or CO2 data reporting. These are now more accurate and more useful as a set of guidelines. So I don't think there's a loss in terms of switching. I think it goes back to that thing at the start. It just sets you on a path towards greater sustainability data accuracy, and that's a good one.
Great. So if you've got any other questions, you can see that Helen just asked me if we're going to upload this up to YouTube. So we've got a YouTube channel. So I'm recording the presentation right now. So you'll be able to see the full presentation on our YouTube channel, which I should upload at the end of today or possibly tomorrow as well. But I'll send you an email to let everyone know that we've sent those out. I'll also send out a copy of a PDF of the slides as well. And if you have...
Sorry, I was just going to say, there's a slight delay on the call on mine, sorry. There is as well, Helen, just to reassure you that if you want the 111 pages from DEFRA, because it is the kind of read that I quite enjoy, it is on their website alongside their CO2 emission factor tools. It's not the worst piece of framework guidance I've read, but it is 111 pages. I think when we first took a pass at it, we brought it down to about 8 pages, 9 pages. So that gives you an idea of how much stuff is in there. Anyway, sorry, Elsa.
No, that's fine. Yeah, that's perfect. Yep. We've got a link on the PDF of the slides which will direct you to the guidelines, and you'll get to peruse it at your own leisure. And I'll be sending out a link to those and a copy of those as well at the end of the presentation. So I suppose we'll close the presentation now, and I hope that everyone has found this informative. If you have any questions, then please feel free to email me and I'll try my best to answer them. And also if you have any feedback or any other topics that you'd like to see covered that would be useful for you, and then please feel free to drop me a line, and we'll try our best. We're hopefully going to try and make this a regular thing, so we'll be sure to keep you updated on the next breakfast briefing. Great, thank you very much.